There's a very long shadow cast by the original Richard Donner's Superman film from 1978. In fact, many people, including myself, would say the last great Superman movie was Superman 2. Since then, there has been a veritable graveyard of attempts to recreate that cinematic magic. So when James Gunn announced that he was going to be trying his hand at another Superman movie, I'll admit I was skeptical. But I saw the film yesterday, and I have to admit, I think James Gunn did it. I won't beat around the bush. I really liked this film. This is an unapologetically joyful, optimistic, feel good movie. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So the movie opens with Superman having been active for 3 years. He's extremely popular. His secret identity as Clark Kent is only partially successful. It seems like quite a few people have sort of figured out that he isn't who he says he is. It also opens, this is not a spoiler because it was in the trailer, with Superman actually getting beat up. Superman actually gets beat up on a lot in this movie. We'll find out that mainly because it seems like more and more powerful enemies seem to be rising out of nowhere to challenge him. We find out later there's a reason for that. Superman is also facing some political backlash at the moment because he intervened in a larger geopolitical conflict between two countries in order to prevent an invasion. But he acted unilaterally and without consulting with any world leaders, particularly the President of the United States. That's naturally raised the conversation of who watches the watcher, and does Superman need to have some kind of oversight over his activity? It's also revealed fairly early on that Lois has already figured out that Clark Kent is Superman. And I was actually very relieved that this was the case because that particular plot point, which I know is canon and it's in every version of the story all the time, but it really just makes Lois look deeply stupid. For someone who's supposed to be a hyper competent, no nonsense journalist, just really strains credulity and it undermines her credibility in a huge way. So I actually was really glad that Gunn decided to sort of just dispense with that at the beginning. They don't have that secret clouding their relationship, and it sort of leaves the movie free to explore other elements of their dynamic. Another key component of this version of the Superman story is that Superman's not the only superhero active right now. There are a variety of metahumans that are active in the world. There's also a group called the Justice Gang. The Justice Gang is comprised of Green Lantern, played by Nathan Fillion, really hamming it up, Hot Girl, and Mr. Terrific. They aren't necessarily Superman's friends, but they are sort of his comrades in arms on certain occasions. If I had to narrow down two main strengths of this film, I would say it's the casting and the tone. In an age of brooding antiheroes and desaturated, colorless landscapes, this movie is a breath of fresh air. It's unapologetically joyful and optimistic and has a real warmth and humanity at its core that I found impossible to resist. I have to give props to David Cornsweet as Superman. I thought he brought a real earnestness and innocence to his portrayal. I also think Rachel Brosnahan was an excellent Lois Lane. Her Lois is smart and sharp without being abrasive and never gives the impression of trying to prove anything to anyone, which I think is a nice change from some previous portrayals. A lot of Gunn's strengths as a filmmaker can also be a weakness. His movies have dynamism, kinetic energy, they're brimming with visual invention. But sometimes the imagination can feel relentless. There's a tendency to not really let the audience take a breath. There might be a few too many characters. It really feels like a lot of subplots were probably left on the cutting room floor. One of the benefits of this is that the pace never drags. At the same time, there were moments when I was really longing for more quiet conversational moments. There are some very good scenes, for instance, between Lois and Clark, where they actually sit down and have genuine philosophical conversations. I would have liked to maybe see a little bit more of that. Another minor quibble, the humor doesn't always land. The Justice Gang stuff isn't quite as funny as it thinks it is. I like Nathan Fillion, but he tends to play this sort of preening, self indulgent diva character. I've seen his shtick before, and it didn't really do that much for me here. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, who I think absolutely crushes it. Honestly, I think it's the best rendition of Luthor that I've seen on screen. I mean, I love Gene Hackman as much as the next person, but his take on Lex Luthor was so heavily comedic that you never really take him seriously as a threat. Just a couple of spoilers here. I won't spend a lot of time on them. But I never would have thought that a character named Mr. Terrific would end up being a highlight for me. I actually want to go and read some Mr. Terrific comics now. He was a real standout. And he probably has my favorite action scene in the entire movie. On the other hand, I didn't really need to see Supergirl. That's one character that has just always been a little too cheesy for me. I mean, maybe they're able to pull off something totally different with the character, but yeah, I couldn't help but groan when she makes a cameo at the end of the film. I have to admit, I was not prepared for the plot twist about Kal-El's Kryptonian parents, which kind of turns it more into an invincible Omni Man situation, which I thought was very interesting. But the truth is, it makes sense. From the Kryptonian perspective, Earth would be very primitive, and we would seem like an inferior population. So I guess it's not terribly surprising, but I really appreciate how they paid that off in the end, where Clark realizes his true parents are the people who raised him. It's his own choices that make him who he is, and he can be who he actually wants to be. And I have to applaud James Gunn. I have to applaud him for being willing to take on a story that has so much baggage and a character that is so iconic and that people have so many preconceptions about, and delivering what really feels like an authentic, original vision that is coming from a highly imaginative and dedicated filmmaker. So, on the whole, I'm going to give this film the coveted slow clap.